Life of Milton by Samuel Johnson. What was Samuel Johnson often called? Doctor. In which country was Samuel Johnson born? England. Which college did Samuel Johnson attend? Pembroke. Which financial issue forced Johnson to leave Oxford? Fund. Which city did Johnson move to after working as a teacher? London. For which magazine did Johnson start writing? Gentleman. Which biography did Johnson write about Richard Savage? Life. What is the title of Johnson's famous dictionary? A Dictionary of English Language. Which playwright's work did Johnson annotate? William Shakespeare. What is the name of Johnson's apologue about an Abyssinian prince? The Rascalus. Which friend travelled with Johnson to Scotland? Boswell. Where was Johnson buried after his death? Westminster Abbey. Which syndrome was Johnson posthumously associated with? Tourette. What literary genre did Johnson influence significantly? Criticism. Which dictionary eventually replaced Johnson's Oxford? Which magazine gave Samuel Johnson his first regular writing job? Gentleman's. How many years did the Gentleman's magazine run? 200. Which biography was Johnson's first major biographical work? Life of Mr. Richard Savage. Which satire inspired Johnson's poem, The Vanity of Human Wishes? Juvenal. In which year was The Vanity of Human Wishes published? 1749. In which year was a Dictionary of English Language published? 1755. How many years did Johnson take to complete his dictionary? 7. Who accompanied Johnson on his journey to Scotland? James Boswell. Which group of islands was a key focus of Johnson's travel narrative? Hebrides. What is the shorter title of Lives of the most eminent English poets? Lives of Poets. How many poets are included in Lives of Poets? 52. Who is the first poet listed in Lives of Poets? Cowley. Which poet wrote Hudibras? Samuel Butler. Who is the most famous epic poet included in the list? John Milton. Which poet is known for his satirical works and was also a clergyman? Jonathan Swift. Who among the poets was also the Earl of Rochester? John Wilmot. Which poet was also known as the Earl of Dorset? Charles Sackville. Who was the Duke of Buckingham mentioned in the list of poets? John Sheffield. Which poet wrote the hymn Joy to the World? Isaac Watts. On which 2 days of the week was the Rambler published? Tuesday and Saturday. In which year did the Rambler start publication? 1750. How many total articles were published in the Rambler? 208. Which earlier periodicals were similar to the Rambler? The Spectator. Which writer recorded many of Johnson's aphorisms? James Boswell. Which periodical contained Johnson's quote about patriotism? The Rambler. Which literary works shows Johnson's mature and lucid style? Preface to Shakespeare. Which poet life did Johnson analyzes in his final 2 paragraphs of Lives of the Poets? Abraham Cowley. Which essay collection besides The Rambler was authored by Johnson? Heidler. Which literary role did Johnson reject for himself? Dictator. In which century poets did Johnson critique in Lives of the Poets? 17th. What was Johnson often criticized for his writing? Verbosity. Which quality of Johnson's writing made him highly quoted? Aphoristic. Which poet's life did Johnson analyze in the Life of Milton? Milton. How does Dr. Johnson define poetry? Art. Which element does poetry unite according to Johnson? Pleasure. What does Johnson considered different from imagination? Invention. Which classical ideal did Johnson believe should control imagination? Reason. Which poem by Milton did Johnson denounce? Lycidas. Which allegorical figures from Paradise Lost did Johnson criticize? Sin. What did Johnson consider unimportant for poetic creation? Inspiration. Which literary form did Johnson believe should have a moral outlook? Epic. From where should an epic poet gather material according to Johnson? History. What should a poet master before becoming a poet according to Johnson? Language. What should a poet adjust to metrical moderation? Sounds. Which philosopher principles did Johnson follow? Aristotle. Which type of verse did Johnson denounce as unmusical? Blank verse. Which poet did Johnson criticize for using a foreign idiom in English? Milton. Which poetic form did Johnson believe had the best musical quality? Heroic. Which political ideology of Milton did Johnson criticize? Republicanism. Which poem by Milton features a cheerful, carefree man? El Allegro. Which poem by Milton represents Puritan ideals? Second Penseroso. Where did Milton stay while leading a reflective life? Orton. Which poetic form did Johnson find vulgar and disgusting? Pastoral. Which poem by Milton did Johnson call harsh and unpleasing? Lycidas. Which kind of passion did Johnson find in Lycidas? Artificial. Which literary elements did Johnson believe Lycidas lacked? Melody. Which poem did Johnson consider Milton's best juvenile work? Comus. Which literary quality did Johnson admire in Comus? Description. Which element did Johnson find lacking in? Drama. Which classical belief influenced Johnson's criticism of Lycidas? Dogma. Which aspect of El Allegro and Second Penseroso did Johnson appreciate? Music. Which of Milton's poetic techniques did Johnson disapprove of? Versification. Which type of truth did Johnson value more than beauty? Scott. Which poetic genre did Johnson say Milton used correctly in Lycidas? Pastoral. Which element of Comus did Johnson admire most? Sentiment. Which play did Johnson find unconvincing and unreasonable? Comus. What did Johnson call the prologue of Comus? Contrary. How did Johnson describe the soliloquies in Comus? Tedious. Which epic did Johnson consider Milton's best and most mature work? Paradise Lost. What was Milton's purpose in Paradise Lost? Vindication. Which two elements did Johnson say Milton merged in Paradise Lost? Probable and marvelous. Which angel narrates the war in heaven in Paradise Lost? Raphael. Who proposes future events in Paradise Lost? Michael. Which literary critic disagreed with Johnson about Adam as a hero? Dryden. What quality did Johnson say criticized Paradise Lost? Sublimity. Which allegorical figures did Johnson criticize in Paradise Lost? Sin and death. What kind of interest did Johnson say Paradise Lost lacked? Human. Which distinction did Johnson say was unclear in Paradise Lost? Spirit and matter. Which sequel to Paradise Lost did Johnson find dull? Paradise Regained. Which drama by Milton did Johnson call a failure? Samson Agonistes. What aspects of Samson Agonistes did Johnson criticize? Plot. Which plot did Johnson say was not the greatest simply because he was not the first? Johnson Milton. Which language did Johnson say influenced Milton blank verse? Italian. How did Johnson describe Milton blank verse? Neither prose nor poetry. Which classical poet influenced Milton according to Johnson? Homer.